This project is funded in part by the Chatham Cultural Council.
A Chatham Marconi Maritime Center production.
April 10th, 1912. Passengers gathered on the docks in Southampton, England, to board the Titanic, the newest, most luxurious vessel in the world, and at 882 feet the largest. Her maiden voyage, with brief stops, first in France, then Ireland, and then across the Atlantic to New York, was under the command of veteran White Star Line Captain E.J. Smith. On board was the latest wireless technology, a 5,000-watt Marconi marine radio with a range of 350 miles, far greater at night. Titanic carried a crew of nearly 900 and more than 1,300 passengers, including some of the most celebrated and wealthiest people of the day. But of the 2,200 souls who sailed that day, only 706, mostly women and children, would reach New York. Whether through human failure or a combination of bad luck and circumstances no one has ever really understood, Captain Smith did not act on a warning that his course was taking the Titanic into a deadly field of ice at a high rate of speed. It was 20 minutes before midnight when the ship struck the ice, a glancing blow to its starboard side, hardly felt by the sleeping passengers, but icy water poured through a 300-foot gash in the hull. The Titanic was doomed. By 2 o'clock in the morning of April 15th, just 2 hours and 37 minutes later, the ship that was designed to be unsinkable broke in two and sank to the bottom of the Atlantic, carrying more than 1,300 souls to their death. There were heroes and there were cowards on the Titanic that night, and the collision quickly revealed who was who. Two of the heroes were Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, Marconi radio operators. Only Bride would survive. They sent the distress code CQD, then later the new international code SOS.
SOS, SOS, CQD, CQD. We are sinking fast. Passengers being put into boats. Titanic.
Finally ordered to abandon their post by Captain Smith, they left, but their wireless cry for help brought the Carpathia and other ships racing to the aid of the survivors. That night at the Sconset wireless station on Nantucket, radio operator Matt Tierney had the late shift. Crackling through the airwaves from the sinking ship, now some 381 miles off Newfoundland, came word of the disaster that had befallen the Titanic. It was repeated over and over. "We have struck an iceberg and are sinking."
During that watch, he picked up and heard distress signals coming in from the Titanic at Sconset Station. What he heard was the Morse code message, was the CQD distress calls from the Titanic, which he copied down the information that was coming across and forwarded on to New York.
Tierney relayed the messages, including a news dispatch to the Associated Press, to Marconi headquarters in New York. The next morning, newspaper readers learned the stunning news. The mighty Titanic had collided with an iceberg. By evening, people's worst fears were confirmed. Hundreds had drowned. The luxurious ship was lost, 12,000 feet below the surface of the Atlantic. Matt Tierney, now listening to the rescue vessel Carpathia, hastily jotted his personal code MC as he relayed the names of the survivors and their messages to loved ones. Like this, from film actress Dorothy Gibson to her future husband.
To Jules Brutalum, safe, picked up by Carpathia. Don't worry, Dorothy.
And a similar one from another survivor.
To Mrs. Anderson, safe aboard Carpathia. Do not worry, Harry Anderson.
A message Matt sent from Sconset to the Carpathia asked the fate of millionaire John Jacob Astor, a real estate and hotel tycoon.
To Operator Carpathia. Is Colonel Astor aboard? FM Samus.
Astor did not survive. Over the next few days, Matt spent hours at his Morse code key as the Carpathia steamed toward New York, where thousands waited. But Matt's flirtation with fame was brief. He was an ordinary man who had done an extraordinary job. A key supporting actor in the great drama of the Titanic, a drama that still fascinates a century later. The world's maritime powers were shocked by the tragedy of the Titanic. Marine architects were humbled. But one modern invention stood out: wireless communication, and its creator, Guglielmo Marconi. There were government hearings in London and New York. Marconi was a hero. Britain's Postmaster General said,
"Those who have been saved through one man, Mr. Marconi and his marvelous invention."
Indeed, Marconi wireless operators had alerted the Carpathia that rescued the survivors, but hundreds more had drowned that night. What could be done, Marconi was asked. A consensus formed, and soon an international treaty was negotiated. Ever since, trained wireless operators were required to man ships' radio rooms around the clock. A new era dawned. The company best equipped to train radio operators and send them to sea? Marconi's Wireless Company. An international ice patrol was created in 1913. Icebergs that break off from Arctic glaciers and float south into Atlantic shipping lanes were monitored.
Wintry storms in the North Atlantic Ocean provide perilous adventure along the busy shipping lanes. Grim memories of the liner Titanic and other vessels which have fallen victim to the treacherous icebergs are evoked by these huge pieces broken off from Greenland glaciers. But much of the danger is removed when ships and planes of the Coast Guard maintain their constant vigil.
In 1921, Matt Tierney and his family moved into a company-owned cottage near Chatham Radio, where it still stands. As a little boy, their grandsons spent summers there.
We'd walk down the path right across the street from the cottage up on Old Comers Road, and we'd walk down the path, which was a nice little shortcut between the houses, and it'd bring you out right by the operations station, and he'd bring me down here. And as we were walking down, he would say, "Now when you go in there, don't bother any of the men while they're working. While you see the men sitting down and working and doing their jobs, don't go over and bother them. They'll come over and there'll be time to talk with them when they're free with what they're doing." When I came through the door, immediately what we'd see is between 6 and sometimes up to 8 different men sitting down at different desks working, and they were with their headsets on, and they were working their key. And the other thing you'd notice right away was the strong smell and odor of cigarettes, tobacco smell in here. And I could hear that very lightly, but everybody was working. And then as different men would finish what they were doing, they would get up with paper and walk up over to a thing with a big wooden rack, and they'd put the messages they had into those racks.
Matt had served in the Navy during World War I, so like other veterans, he marched in 4th of July parades and attended baseball games. The family became a part of the Chatham community, his daughter Elizabeth marrying a Chatham radio operator. It was a fine life, an ordinary life. As a 21-year-old operator on Nantucket, Matt had befriended a junior man named David Sarnoff. Sarnoff, who was then just 18 years old, an immigrant from Russia. rose through the ranks of the Radio Corporation of America. In 1919, RCA bought out the Marconi Company, and soon Sarnoff was its president. The two young radio operators had taken vastly different roads from Nantucket. But when Matt retired in 1952, after 48 years as a wireless operator, it was Sarnoff himself who gave the okay for Matt and his family to stay on as long as they wished in the company-owned cottage in Chatham. The Tierneys lived there until the end of Matt's life in 1962. Matt and Lillian are buried side by side in Union Cemetery, little more than a mile from Chatham Radio. Nothing special about it, just a standard headstone. Nothing to tell a curious visitor about Matt Tierney's life, how he listened to coded messages on a moonless night, and, thanks to Marconi's marvelous invention, helped more than 700 men, women, and children to survive the collision of nature's power and the ship that embodied mankind's arrogance, pride, and conceit, the mighty Titanic.
This was my grandfather's, and he used it every day, and he used this particular bug throughout his career here in Chatham. When I hold this in my hands and I can touch it and see it, I'm touching something and holding something that was part of his life for many, many years. And it does make you feel like you're a lot closer to him when I can hold something that I know he used every day for years and years and years.